Hey, dear listeners. Quick note about this video. I goofed a little bit because this fight was a lot harder than what I originally remembered. And so my previous captured footage of this saw me getting my butt kicked several times. And I thought, man, I can't use this footage. I got to get one where I actually beat the boss. And so instead of just clipping out the beginning portion of this fight, or this level where you're talking to the character, you're going up to the fight, you're talking to the rabbit man, I accidentally deleted the entire file. And so I had to go back, I had to go into this game after all that, and I thought it would replay the opening section, and it didn't. So I apologize. My bad, dear listeners. That's a complete and total party foul on my part. So hopefully you guys can forgive me. But without further ado, though, we're going to get into this and we're going to talk about it. Leading up to this fight, Furi, or the Stranger is what he's called, he is walking up to the boss fight, and she has these drones that you'll see during the fight. And they're scanning the character, reading off some of his strengths, some of his weaknesses, if there even are any. And she's doing this to come up with some kind of battle plan, some kind of strategy to figure out how to defeat this opponent. And one of the things, there's a few things with this boss fight in particular that we're going to get into, but the first one I want to tackle with is the first one with the drones. And this is actually a positive. This is something that I thought of as a positive, because we're told in the Bible to be alert when it comes to the schemes of the devil, to be aware of them. You see this in James chapter 4, verses 7. Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Well, how do we know to resist the devil? Well, it's because we learn what his tricks are. We learn what his schemes are. And in order to do that, we read the Bible, we study it, and we figure out how God works, and we figure out how Satan uses temptations to tear us down. So it's always good to have a battle plan when it comes to living the Christian life. If we focus more on honoring God rather than honoring ourselves, then it should be easy to come up with a battle plan to avoid the schemes of the devil. Now, some of the things that we are tempted to do as Christians is we're tempted to take more control over our lives than what we actually have. And so that's the second thing that we're going to get into, is this idea here of this particular boss's obsession with planning with perfection that is ultimately her downfall. Because think about it, when it comes to life, if you're like me, you like to have a lot of control. You're a bit of a control freak, let's just be honest. And the problem with that is that we tend to lean into perfectionism. And when something doesn't go quite the way that we had planned, it's almost like the house of cards comes tumbling down, right? And so we panic. But the thing is that this is a crazy burden to carry, because we're putting too much of a burden on ourselves. We're essentially trying to play God, is what it is. There's a pride issue going on there. And the verse that we're going to look into here discussing this is actually in James. We're going to spend a lot of time in the book of James over the next few minutes. And it says here, James chapter 4, verse 13 through 16. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Verse 15. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. I remember when my pastor started saying that phrase when he was talking about going to do something, and he would end it with Lord willing, or he'd start it off with Lord willing, I'm going to go do this tomorrow. And I remember, even just as a young kid in college, just hearing some people say that, I'm like, that is so weird. Why would you say that? Well, it comes from this verse. And it's a biblical thing to say. When we make plans, we need to consider what God's plans are before our own. Now, I don't think we need to get too nitpicky with this and be like, oh, well, is it God's will for me to go see Detective Pikachu tomorrow? Well, I guess if we're reformed here and we believe that God's will is sovereign, then yeah, I guess there would be there would be something to that. But what I'm getting at is, is to not obsess over this to the point where it's like, oh man, we say it like after everything, like, well, I'm gonna get the barbecue ribs at Chili's or something. Can they strike us for saying Chili's? Whatever, I'm gonna say it. But that's the thing, is that, when it comes to planning and living our lives, it's just having this humility of knowing who is actually in charge of our lives here. It's knowing that God is the one that ordains our steps. God is the one that ordains our paths. And so we can't just sit and assume that, oh, well, tomorrow I'm going to go to Chili's, or tomorrow I'm going to go do this or that. Now, I'm being vague intentionally here to get you to think, to get you to kind of ponder this yourself and to drive you to this text and study it for yourself. But when it comes to living our lives, we ought to have this posture of submitting to God's will, that His plans are perfect. His plan is the one that is being laid out, and that it's the one that we will ultimately acquiesce to. It's the one that we will ultimately follow in line, even if we don't think we are. Even if we don't think we are. But we all have a lot of plans, right? We all want to do different things in our day-to-day lives. Now, the thing with this, though, is that oftentimes our plans fall apart, right? I mean, let's just be honest. It happens. That's just how life works. Now, the thing that we can be assured of is that even though our plans may fall apart, even though our plans may fail, God's plans will not fail. Let's look at Proverbs 19, verse 21. It says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." That's the thing. God is sovereign. His plans will come to pass. His plans will happen. His plans are perfect. His plans are higher than ours, and they are for a much greater good than what we could ever imagine. And so as we live our lives, as we plan, as we think about things, it's not bad to plan. It's just we need to have a posture of, well, what is God's will? If the Lord wills, then I will do this tomorrow. If the Lord wills, then I will, hang out with some friends in Colorado or something. I don't know, But again, go to those texts for yourselves. Study those. Think about those today and kind of meditate on that. But also be assured that even if your plans fail, even if my plans fail, even if something doesn't happen, like for example, like this video didn't go up on Wednesday because just God had different plans. God's plan will always come to pass. It will happen. Even when we don't think it will happen. It will happen. So that's all I have for this episode of Furi. As always, head over to the website, thereformedgamers.com, for a more in-depth breakdown of these verses here, of this kind of idea that we discussed in this episode here. And until next time, dear listeners, enjoy the rest of this fight, and GG, and amen.
That's enough. Assuming manual control.
That was sweet. You beat her at her own game. She was a cheater anyway. I wonder what she would have made of my plan. What chance of success she would have given it. But we are not the kind that rely on probabilities, eh? We rely on what's in here. We take our chances.